Great. Okay, Hare Krishna. So we'll be carrying on with chapter 6 of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta after a short break. And hopefully we'll get some Shakti from His Holiness Mahavishnu Swami. The talk that he gave, the answers to our questions, do you remember from the beginning? It's absolutely amazing. So it's always special to be able to do this with Prabhupada's disciples. Very special thing. So hopefully he's given us some Shakti to get some insight into Prabhupada's pastimes. So we'll be carrying on with chapter 6. And as usual, we'll chant the Mangala Charanam first, which I've just posted up in the chat for everyone. I'll just make sure I put the right link. Yeah, great. Okay.
All right.
Brilliant. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Caitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vashapanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Great. So we'll be starting halfway through chapter 6. Would you like to start?
Yeah.
You have your glasses?
Yeah. During 1950 to 51, he continued his letter writing, attempting to gain a hearing with various organizations and leaders. He wrote the World Pacifist Committee, the President of India, and the Minister of Education. He wrote to the Indian Congress for Cultural Freedom, which wrote back, suggesting that Abai had written them by mistake. He wrote to an official of the All Religions Conference in Bombay, advising that because of their approach, nothing practical would come out of their conference. The practical solution is lying in the transcendental message of Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, as given by him in the Bhagavad Gita. On September 14, 1951, he corresponded with Daniel Bailey of the American Reporter, a magazine published by the American Embassy in New Delhi. Abai pointed out that the philosophy of understanding the absolute truth, as realized by the sages of India, was higher than attempts to combine East and West. Mr. Bailey replied that he was aware of Eastern philosophical and religious influence in the West, and cited the progress of a yoga mission in New York City, which he said had some influence on the Protestants in America. But when Abhay asked if one of his articles could appear in the American Reporter, Mr. Bailey replied, "If we were to give considerable space in the American Reporter to, say, the Gita, we in all fairness would have to give equal space to the other philosophies, and our desire is not to endorse or condemn any of them, but simply to assist in a better understanding." In a further reply, Abhay differed with Mr. Bailey's contention that people should be encouraged to make their own interpretation of religion. Less intelligent men are always guided by those who are superior in knowledge in all spheres of life. Abhay even wrote to the Ford Foundation in Detroit, and a staff assistant wrote back, "Regret to advise you that we are unable to pursue your suggestions concerning the establishment of an association of the intelligent class of people. The Ford Foundation has no program in which specific ideas such as you describe might be included." Although most of his suggestions were rejected, occasionally he received words of appreciation. A certain Dr. Muhammad Saeed, PhD, a professor at the University of Allahabad, wrote, "You seem to have assimilated the universal teaching of ancient India, which is really laudable." And the governor of Uttar Pradesh replied, "You are doing noble work, for nothing is nobler than to be God-minded." Not only was Abhay giving advice in his letters, but he was hinting that he could also give practical help. If he could obtain institutional backing, he was prepared to do many things: teach classes, manage temples, teach temple worship, and initiate devotees, as well as organize various kinds of field work to propagate the principles of Bhagavad Gita. Usually, he did not spell out exactly how things should be done, but he pointed to the philosophical defects in the present methods and the superiority of working in accord with the Vedic literature. By the grace of his spiritual master, he knew the science of applying Bhagavad Gita to almost any situation. If someone would only show interest, he could teach that person the superiority of working according to Bhagavad Gita. After attending a meeting in which a prominent industrialist had stressed harmonious relationships between labor and management in his factory, Abhay wrote a long letter suggesting the man consider the good effects the congregational chanting of Hare Krishna could produce. Since the factory had a special employees' club and lounge, Abhay suggested that the workers assemble there and chant Hare Krishna. Abhay urged everyone to surrender to Krishna, but most people had their own philosophies and took his spirit to be sectarian or proselytizing. But Bhagavad Gita was universal. Abhay wrote, "And God could not be omitted from any program, even in the name of a secular state. Krishna, as the father of all living beings, had jurisdiction over all programs, organizations, and governments. Indians especially should appreciate the universal scope of Bhagavad Gita." Although Abhay always had a plan of action behind his suggestions, he first sought the interest of his correspondent. There was never much interest, and he was repeatedly turned down, but he never felt discouraged. He always anticipated finding a sympathizer. He kept copies of all his letters and their replies. A word of appreciation or a slight show of interest from a correspondent being sufficient to elicit from Abhay another thoughtful reply. He had developed a keen sense of dedication to Lord Chaitanya's mission without expecting leadership from the Gaudiya Mat. He still cherished the idea that his godbrothers would soon come together and preach, but he didn't put any energy into the mats, since to do so would mean to become involved in one of the factions. Staying clear of the Gaudiya Mat's internal fray, Abai continued his letter-writing campaign alone, introducing himself as a preacher of Bhagavad Gita and editor of Back to Godhead magazine.
In 1948, Abai closed his Lucknow factory. He had fallen behind in employees' salaries, and since 1946 he had been paying past rent in installments. But when sales dropped off, continuing the factory became impossible. He lost everything. Srila Prabhupada. I started a big laboratory in Lucknow. Those were golden days. My business flourished like anything. Everyone in the chemical business knew. But then, gradually, everything dwindled. With the help of some acquaintances in Allahabad, he opened a small factory there, in the same city where his Prayag pharmacy had failed 15 years before. He moved to Allahabad with his son at Vrindavan and continued manufacturing medicines. While the rest of the family remained at Banerjee Lane in Calcutta, Abai continued his traveling, but now he was often away for months at a time. And then he had the dream for a second time. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appeared before him. Again he was beckoning, indicating that Abai should take sannyas. And again Abai had to put the dream aside. He was a householder with many responsibilities. To take sannyas would mean to give up everything. He had to earn money. He now had 5 children. Why is Guru Maharaj asking me to take sannyas, he thought. It was not possible now. The Allahabad business was unsuccessful. At present, the condition of our business is not very good, he wrote his servant Gauranga, who had asked to rejoin him. When the condition gets better, and if you are free at that time, I will call for you. He worked earnestly, but results were meager. As with everything else, Abai saw his present circumstances through the eyes of scripture, and he could not help but think of the verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Yasyaham anugrinami harisye tadanam sanai tato danam tyajantyasya swajana dukkha dukhitam. When I feel especially merciful towards someone, I gradually take away all his material possessions. His friends and relatives then reject this poverty-stricken and most wretched fellow. He had heard Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati quote the verse, and now he thought of it often. He took it that his present circumstances were controlled by Lord Krishna, who was forcing him into a helpless position, freeing him for preaching Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada, somehow or other my intention for preaching the message of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu increased, and the other side decreased. I was not disinclined, but Krishna forced me. You must give it up. The history is known, how it decreased. In Srimad Bhagavatam, Queen Kunti had also prayed, My dear Lord Krishna, your lordship can be easily approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot approach you with sincere feeling. Srila Prabhupada. So in 1950, I retired practically. Not retired, but a little in touch with business, whatever is going on. Then almost it became nil. Whatever was there, all right, you do whatever you like. Anyone would like to read? Okay, we'll carry on here. Abai's wife independently moved along with her sons back to her father's house at 72 Mahatma Gandhi Road. She had reasoned that her financial support was becoming precarious. Abai was spending most of his time away from home. He was gradually disassociating himself from the family. When after several months he would meet his wife and children, his father-in-law would criticize him. You are always going outside. You are always worshipping God. You are not looking after my family. Whenever he could, Abai would send his family some money. Mr. Sudhir Kumar Dutta, Abai's nephew, I sometimes noticed how he was thinking so many things about his family, about his writings, about making bigger and bigger in business. What to do, what to do. He was thinking seriously to earn more money from his business. But that means he has to give more time for his business. And his writing, he'd never give up. He was writing more and more, and people sometimes abused him. Hey, you are writing religious things. You are only thinking of God? Then who will maintain your family? What will you do for the family? Sometimes he argued with them. What has this family given me? Why should I forget about God? This is the real thing, what I am doing. You cannot realize what I am doing. On a visit to Calcutta, Abai stayed at the home of his father-in-law, where he was given his own room. When his wife served him dinner, he noticed that everything had been purchased from the market. How is this? He asked. The cook is sick today, Radharani replied. Abai thought, it is better that we not live here at the home of her father, or else she will be spoiled even more. So he moved his family to a new address on Chetla Street. Here he sometimes stayed with his family for a few months, writing articles and doing a minimal amount of business. But most of the time he stayed in Allahabad. In Allahabad, Abai, now 54, lived like a Vanaprastha, or one who has retired from family life. He was indifferent to the activities of family and business, activities a family man generally considers his prime objects of responsibility and happiness. In his writings, Abai had several times discussed the 4 ashrams, or spiritual divisions of Vedic society: brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. In the first division, the brahmachari ashram, a young boy's parents send him to the place of the guru, or gurukul, where he lives a simple life, studying the Vedic literature under the guidance of his guru. Thus, in his childhood and youth, he learns the principles of austerity and spiritual knowledge that form the basis for his entire life. At age 21, the brahmachari may take a wife and thus enter the next ashram, the grihastha ashram, or, like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he may choose to remain a lifelong brahmachari. In his boyhood, Abai had remained celibate and had imbibed the principles of devotion to Krishna from his father and mother. Although he had lived at home, his upbringing had been the equivalent of brahmachari life. And by marriage at the age of 21, he had entered the grihastha ashram at the appropriate age. Gaura Mohan's example had shown Abai how to remain a devotee of Krishna even in family life. And as Vaishnavas, Abai and his wife had avoided the excesses of materialistic household life. At 50, a man is supposed to retire from his family activities, and this stage is called Vanaprastha. In the Vanaprastha ashram, both man and wife agree to abstain from further sexual contact. They may continue living together, but the emphasis is on spiritual partnership. As Vanaprasthas, they may travel together on pilgrimage to the holy places in India, preparing for their inevitable departure from the material world. Thus, the Vedic ashrams, after allowing one to fulfill material life, enable one to end the cycle of repeated birth and death and attain the eternal spiritual world. A man of 50 should be able to see by his aging body that inevitable death is approaching, and he should have the good sense to prepare. In the final division, the sannyas ashram, the man places his wife in the care of a grown son and fully dedicates himself to serving the Supreme Lord. Formerly, the sannyas ashram meant a solitary life of penances in the Himalayas. But in the Gaudiya Vaishnav line, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had emphasized preaching. Although Abai had not formally defined his status within the 4 ashrams, he appeared to be living more as a vanaprastha than a grihastha. He saw his business failures and his distasteful family situation as Krishna's blessings, freeing him from family responsibilities and turning him wholeheartedly towards executing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's order to preach.
I think Mahamantra was looking for the thing. I don't know if he found it.
Okay. Don't know if anyone else wants to read.
I'll carry on if you like.
Great.
Okay.
Oh, thanks. In Allahabad, Abai managed to save enough money to revive the printing of Back to Godhead, and in February 1952, from his editorial office and home at 57B Canning Road, the first issue in 8 years appeared. As before, he did everything himself, all the writing, typing, editing, meeting with the printer, and finally distributing the copies by hand, as well as mailing them to respectable leaders throughout India. This, he felt, was the real purpose of living in Allahabad or anywhere. This was the best use of money, the purpose of human life, to engage fully in glorifying the Supreme Lord. Other things were temporary and would soon be lost. When he visited his family in Calcutta, old friends would gather in his room and he would preach and give classes on Bhagavad Gita. Abai invited his wife and family to take part in these discussions, but they would resolutely sit in an upstairs room, often taking tea, as if in defiance of his preaching. Abai was supporting them, he was still associating with them, but he was bent on preaching, and they were not making it attractive for him to do so within the family. If there were to be family life for Abai, then his wife and sons would have to recognize and rejoice in the fact that he was becoming a full-fledged preacher. They would have to understand that his life's concern was to serve his spiritual master's mission. They could not simply ignore his transformation. They could not insist that he was simply an ordinary man. Abai continued to try to draw his wife in, hoping she would gradually follow him in the preacher's life, but she had not the slightest interest in her husband's preaching. And why should he spend his days worrying about family, chemicals, and money? Let his relatives criticize, but Back to Godhead was the real service he could offer to the whole family of mankind. Madhavendra Puri, a great spiritual preceptor and predecessor of Lord Caitanya, had written about the devotees' indifference to worldly criticism. O demigods and forefathers, please excuse me. I am unable to perform any more offerings for your pleasure. Now I have decided to free myself from all reactions to sins simply by remembering anywhere and everywhere the great descendant of Yadu and the great enemy of Kamsa, Lord Krishna. I think that this is sufficient for me, so what is the use of further endeavours? Let the sharp moralists accuse me of being illusioned. I do not mind. Experts in Vedic activities may slander me as being misled. Friends and relatives may call me frustrated. My brothers may call me a fool. The wealthy Mammonites may point me out as mad, and the learned philosophers may assert that I'm much too proud. Still, my mind does not budge an inch from the determination to serve the lotus feet of Govinda, though I be unable to do it. Why should he waste time with petty family problems when he held answers to the problems of India and the world? As a knower of Bhagavad Gita, he felt that his first obligation was to offer solutions to the complex crisis of war, hunger, immorality, crime, all symptoms of godlessness. And if dedicating himself to such work meant that other, lesser responsibilities suffered, then there was no loss. Someone else want to?
Yeah, thanks. I've finally found where we are. So, okay, I'm off mute. In March 1952, Abai published another issue of Back to Godhead. It was dedicated mostly to a biographical article Abai had written about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and his father, Srila Bhaktivinode Thakur. He, Bhaktivinode Thakur, vehemently protested against the principles of those pseudo-transcendentalists now passed in the name of Lord Caitanya. He initiated the reformatory movement by literary contributions while he still engaged as a high government officer. During his householder life, and serving as a magistrate, he wrote books of various descriptions in Bengali, English, Sanskrit, etc., to present an actual picture of pure devotional activities to Lord Chaitanya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj got inspiration from his very childhood, all about Srila Thakur Bhaktivinode's movement. He worked as the private secretary of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and as such, Bhaktivinoda Thakur gave him, Srila Saraswati Thakur, the transcendental power of attorney to espouse the cause of Lord Chaitanya. And so after Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's departure, Srila Saraswati Thakur took up reins of that reformatory movement. Absorbed in producing his monthly journal, Abai went about his other activities only superficially. Sometimes he travelled on business, or taking the night train from Allahabad to Calcutta, visited his family. When his compartment was not crowded, he would turn on a light while others slept. Riding a night train provided a good opportunity to think or even write. Sometimes he would sleep for a few hours and then sit up again and look out the window to see only night and the reflected lights of the train compartment shining back at him, the windows reflecting his face. Halfway through the 12-hour journey, the sky would lighten, turning from grey to light blue, and the first white clouds would appear in the sky. He could see lights in the towns and hear the train horn warning. When the train slowed and stopped at a station, tea vendors would walk alongside the train windows yelling, "Chai, chai, chai." The loud sing-song din filling the ears with chai, and chai filling the air with its aroma, as hundreds of passengers sipped their morning tea. During his more than 20 years of extensive train travel, Abai had noticed more and more people smoking cigarettes, and more women travelling alone. India was becoming westernized, and the national leaders were paving the way, the blind leading the blind. They wanted the kingdom of God without God. They wanted a progressive, industrialized India without Krishna. From the windows, he could see large fields being left uncultivated, and yet people were hungry. Abai would sometimes read a newspaper and cut out an article that seemed to warrant a reply in Back to Godhead, or that sparked an idea for an essay. He would deliberate over how to approach people for assistance, whom to approach, and how to start a society of Krishna-conscious devotees. People not only in India, but all over the world could take to Krishna consciousness. The Chaitanya Bhagavat had predicted that the name of Lord Chaitanya would one day be known in every town and village. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had wanted that. He had sent preachers to England, but they had only gained a protocol visit with the royalty, stood in line, bowed before the crown, and then come back to India without affecting any change in the Western people. Abai thought about sending Back to Godhead abroad. His agents, Thakur, Spink and Company, had contracts in America and Europe. People read English all over the world, and some of them would surely appreciate the ideas from Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. This was what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had wanted. Krishna consciousness was not for India alone. It was India's greatest gift, and it was for everyone. To start reading chapter 7, does someone else want to go?
Can I read?
Please,
Okay.
Prabhu.
The League of Devotees wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all practical purposes throughout the whole world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free board and lodgings. Apply A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the Leader of Devotees, Bharati Bhavan, P.O. Jhansi, UP, Abhay Chanandi. It was another 12 hours ride with dozens of stops, the train rattling and clattering and its rocking from side to side made writing difficult. But a boy crowded on the wooden bench with other third-class passengers, keeping writing within the dingy compartment. Passengers eyed one another complacently, and soot and dust blew the open windows as the train sped along. Outside the past monotonous embankment of loose stones, bright violet trumpets flowers bloomed on tall stalks in the shadow trackside ditches. Water buffalo and oxen grazed in the distance, or sometimes pulled a plough before a solitary farmer. A boy was going to Jhansi not for business but for preaching. 1 month before, in October 1952, when a boy had visited Jhansi on business, Mr. Dubey, a customer and owner of Jhansi Hospital, had invited him to lecture at the Gita Mandir. Many Jhansi people appreciated things religious or humanitarian, whether from Vaishnavas, Theosophists, Mayavadis, politicians, or whatever. They regarded almost any path as dharma as long as it showed some edifying piety or tendency towards the public welfare. Mr. Dubey had read with interest several issues of Bhakti Godhead and had therefore requested a boy to speak. A boy had been eager, and he had found keen interest among the audience of more than 100 people, many of them young medical students and graduates from the local Ayurvedic college.
Abhay was 56, and his commanding presentation of Krishna consciousness had impressed the young, religious-minded people of Jhansi. 25-year-old Prabhakar Misra, principal of the Vedanta Sanskrit College, head medical office of the Jhansi Ayurvedic University, saw that Abhay was very forceful in his desire to spread Krishna consciousness. Dr. Misra regarded him as a kind of guru. Although dressed in white, here is a humble person, he thought, a real sadhu. Short and stocky, Dr. Sastry, just beginning his career in Ayurvedic medicine, was an active young man fascinated by Abhay's purity and his vision of a world movement for distributing India's culture. Older men like Tol Swab Ramachandran Hariharan Mitra, a utensil shopkeeper who wrote poetry and wore a right Nehru cap, also wanted to learn more about Lord Chaitanya from Abhay. Dr. Mulik, who was the Gita Mandir secretary, and Dr. Siddhi from the university, along with their wives, had sincerely approached Abhay after his talk and asked him please to visit Jhansi again. Abhay had come to them not as a pharmaceutical salesman or as a man with family concerns, but purely as a devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Although the specific applications of Krishna consciousness as given by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati were now to his audience, these teachings had interested them, and the more Abhay had expressed these teachings and spoken of his ambitions for spreading Krishna's message, the more his hearers had encouraged him. Several of them had suggested he conduct his mission in Jhansi, and they had promised to help him. Dr. Sastry had even invited Abhay to come live with him. He would introduce Abhay to important citizens and arrange for lectures in the various meeting places of Jhansi. After staying for 10 days, Abhay had returned to Allahabad, but remembering Jhansi, he had been unable to concentrate on his business. Something more important was on his mind, the need for an association of devotees propagating the teachings and practices of Krishna consciousness worldwide. With the Gaudiya math now broken into permanent schisms, these godbrothers conducted their own private ashrams in separate localities. Apparently impervious to any reconciliations, something would have to be done if the overwhelming atmosphere of godlessness was to be corrected. There must emerge, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had envisioned, a league of preachers with activities worldwide.
The nations of the world had sought unity through the League of Nations and recently through the United Nations. The League had failed, and so would the United Nations unless it recognized the true spiritual unity and equality of all living beings in terms of their intimate relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A boy did not expect any good to come of such organizations. Though they wanted peace and unity, their attempts were simply another feature of godlessness. No, creating peace and unity was the duty of Vaishnavas. So a boy had been thinking that perhaps a likely place to start an organization of devotees would be Jhansi. It wasn't a major city, but at least he had found concerned people. The students had listened and accepted, and he had said they would help. A boy had sensed a certain lack of sincerity and depth in their appreciation, and a sentimentality that made him doubt their seriousness. But if he could find a few or even one who was serious, then he would have a beginning. He wanted to preach, and that was his mission. Besides, he was getting older. If something were to begin, it should be now. So he would go to Jhansi again to stay for an indefinite duration, without much concern for his Allahabad affairs. A boy left his pharmaceutical business with his son and nephew, informing him that he was going to Jhansi.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. We'll read a little bit more if everyone's happy. Okay. As the train pulled into the station, Abai saw Dr. Shastri waving energetically. They rode together by Tanga to Dr. Shastri's dispensary, and the talkative, effusive doctor promised many preaching opportunities and interviews. Dr. Shastri also spoke of the law of Jhansi. The site of the present city had formerly been a part of the forest in which Lord Ramachandra had practiced austerities many thousands of years ago. The Pandavas had lived here during their exile, and since then, many great Vedic sages had their hermitages in the area. Jhansi had also been the home of an Indian heroine, Lakshmi Bai, who in the mid-19th century had taken part in starting the Indian independence movement against the British regime. Statues and pictures of Lakshmi Bai riding a horse and holding a sword in her upraised hand were displayed throughout the town. But the Jhansi of 1952 was a crowded, poor city with dirt streets and minimal technological amenities. Dr. Shastri lived alone in a 2-story rented building in Jhansi's Sipri Bazaar. On the first floor, he had his clinic, and upstairs, his one-room residence, which he had offered to share with Abai. The young but influential doctor was a good person to introduce Abai to receptive citizens of Jhansi, and he was eager to do so. Outgoing and energetic, he moved easily amongst the people of his town. He was respectful towards Abai, who was twice his age and whom he appreciated as being firmly fixed in the Vaishnava philosophy and way of life. Dr. Shastri saw it as his duty to help Abai, and he gladly introduced Abai to others and arranged for lectures. Abai and Dr. Shastri would cook and eat together like family members. Abai revealed his idea for a League of Devotees, an organization with worldwide scope but based in Jhansi. The citizens of Jhansi, he said, should all take part in helping spread Lord Krishna's mission. Lord Caitanya had said that Indians have a special responsibility to distribute God consciousness, both in India and around the world. Dr. Shastri, in his heart, always it was burning that the whole world was suffering in the materialistic view. Everyone is busy in eat, drink, and be merry. So the whole day he was touring and preaching his mission that was prescribed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Guru Maharaj. He was having iron-willed determination and self-confidence about his mission. He was not doubtful at all. He was Dridha Vrata, staunchly determined. Actually, he was always preaching, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam, Kilau nastyeva, nastyeva, nastyeva gatir anyata. No other way except Hare Krishna Nam. So always discussing. Sometimes the whole night he was discussing with me, and sometimes I was fed up. I was requesting, please don't disturb me. Please let me sleep. And he, the old man missionary worker, he was just like a young man. I was a young chap, and he was just like my friend, my elder brother. He was like my guide and teacher, because the preacher is a friend, philosopher, and guide. He was always trying to create a good atmosphere through Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. The whole Bhagavad Gita was his practical life. His mission was not a mission of preaching only, but of practical action. He was also trying to catch me for this mission, and I would try to slip away. I did not think that he would do any miracle for spiritual revolution of the world, although that is what he urged us.
While Dr. Shastri tended his clinic, Abhay sat and spoke with patients, occasionally recommending medicines, but mostly preaching. For now he was content to live and preach in Jhansi. Here was life, people receptive to his preaching, who responded to his urging them to chant Hare Krishna. His desire and determination to leave everything else behind and preach day and night, depending on Krishna for the result, were increasing. He began regularly lecturing and chanting at various programs in the city, sometimes at several in one day. On Sundays, he would lecture at the Sadhana Mandir, another day at the Gita Mandir, another day at the Theosophical Society, and regularly in people's homes. Dr. Ram Mitra, the shopkeeper poet, maintained a Shiva temple near his home, and Abhay began to perform kirtan and lecture there. Sometimes Dr. Mitra would speak in Hindi on Bhagavad Gita at the Sadhana Mandir, and Abhay would attend. Sometimes Abhay would visit Mr. Mitra at his utensils shop. The shop was in a crowded Jhansi bazaar and opened onto the busy street. Abhay would sit down like an ordinary customer amidst stacks of stainless steel buckets, plates, bowls, and lotus, and speak to Dr. Mitra and friends about Caitanya Charitamrita. Or sometimes he would listen to Mr. Mitra tell about his published book of poetry and his literary reputation. Mr. Mitra saw that Abhay's ambition was no less than to make the whole city of Jhansi alive with Krishna consciousness. Abhay quoted Caitanya Charitamrita. One who has received the great fortune of taking birth in India should make his life perfect and then do good for others by spreading Krishna consciousness. And, Abhay would add, the whole world is waiting, Mr. Mitra, for our spiritual revolution. Mr. Mitra would nod, his handsome Nehru-like face forming a smile, but he saw that Abhay wanted people to do more than merely listen to him. He wanted them to do something. Once Mr. Mitra offered Abhay a copy of his book, showing him the foreword by a famous man, and repeatedly mentioning that the great sadhu, Vinoba Bhave, had liked the poems very much. When Mr. Mitra learned that Abhay was a regular milk drinker, he began offering Abhay fresh milk daily from his cow, a black cow, and black cows, Mr. Mitra said, gave especially good milk. Abhay invited Mr. Mitra to accompany him on foot to nearby villages along with a kirtan party for preaching, but Mr. Mitra declined, being unable to get anyone to tend the shop for him. Another young Ayurvedic doctor was Dr. Siddhi, who immediately expressed interest in Abhay's enthusiastic plans for spreading Krishna consciousness. Dr. Siddhi: he came several times to my place. I've got a kirtan room on my roof, and he performed kirtan there, as well as at the Gita Mandir. We were also going daily to the Theosophical Society. There was an atmosphere, a very pious, sacred, and calm atmosphere, when the kirtan and preaching and lectures were performed. He used to play harmonium. We accompanied him for meeting people and preaching his mission. The main thing was to perform kirtan and give a lecture on the Bhagavad Gita and the life of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was his lord, and I also loved him. Radhelal Mullik, secretary of the Gita Mandir and Sadhana Mandir, began meeting often with Abhay. Radhelal Mullik: I was very much influenced by him. I used to spend 3 or 4 hours every morning in his association. He had many big scriptures. He was mainly concerned about the books, about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was also writing at that time. The president of the Gita Mandir and I both volunteered to cook for him.
Hare Krishna. So I think time-wise, we might wait there, leave it for a moment. But if anyone's got any comments or reflections, please, now's the time.
Very good. Very. I feel more fired up after that than when I started. And I'm thinking about taking elocution lessons. Don't worry.
No, it was great.
Good, it's nice
Yeah,
to hear your
exactly.
accent.
I've been listening back to Chaitanya Swami, actually. He speaks very, very clearly, so I'm learning from him. So
No, it was so nice to hear both of you read, and Pallika
Yeah,
as well.
so
We're
nice.
so glad that you joined us. Thank you.
it's
It
a
was
wonderful
fantastic.
book, isn't it? It's a beautiful book. It's a great book to read in the evening, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
It's nice to read in the evening.
It's so nicely written. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
right.
we always say, like we say it practically every week.
Yeah.
It's like being in a movie, that you just become immersed in this whole world and you're like gripped by it. You can smell it and see it, and it's just
Yeah, it is very well written. Yeah, it's a beautiful book. Yeah, by Satsvarat Maharaj, isn't it?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just feeling today, I heard one, I was reminded on Facebook of one piece of music, and it was this really kind of like evocative, like it had this sort of I don't know what it kind of like a soul-stirring piece of music, you know. It was like a sort of a call to arms, and it was really kind of like dramatic. And I remembered sort of, you know, my life when I was young, I was like really idealistic, and I used to think, oh, we can change the world, and you know, this kind of thing. And I was just like, oh, you know, sometimes you get a bit flat, or you're a bit, you know, you kind of go through the motions. And when you hear about Prabhupada doing that, he's like so fired up, even when people think he's being a bit stupid, you know. He's like, he's got this kind of fire in his belly, and he's
Yeah, he
determined.
did amazing things. It's like Pallika's always saying to me, Prabhupada, he sent one of his disciples to O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and he says, go and ask the manager to call that Hare Krishna Airport. Prabhupada was serious, and the disciple went and asked the manager. And that was like one of the biggest airports in America. I think it was Chicago.
Right, I think it rings a bell. They used to distribute books there, right? Yeah, it was a big spot.
They had a lot of conflicts with the devotees too over distributing books in the airport. But
Right.
when Prabhupada heard it was called O'Hare Airport, he was going to tell the manager to call it Hare Krishna Airport. I mean, it was serious. It was like, it was deadly serious. It was like, you know, it's amazing stories like that. It shows you what he thought could be done, you know.
Yeah.
No harm in asking, sort of thing. You know?
Yeah. And when you speak to devotees that were around at that time, when we spoke to one Prabhupada disciple, and he's fairly recently, you know, and he was kind of like, he came and visited, and he's sort of like, what was going on here? He's from America, and he said to us, he said, you know, obviously now as a movement it's grown, and you know there's lots of married people, and he said back in the day, he said we had absolutely no money at all to do anything, but we had so much faith. And when you read those stories of Prabhupada and then the devotees in the early days, they genuinely, I mean, we'll see it as if we go further on, the kind of ridiculous things they got up to. And on the material level, it is ridiculous, but they genuinely believe that because Prabhupada wanted them to do it, they could just go and do anything. Like they could meet the Beatles, it was just nuts, you know.
Well, sometimes money can make you lazy, can't it? I mean, it's like, you know, they say Bhakti Siddhanta used to keep the disciples in debt just so that they'd keep working, you know. Because if they weren't in debt, they would just sit about eating all day and not do anything, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be a bit of distraction money, or it can be a bit of overemphasis on it, you know.
Yeah.
I used to do Sankirtan quite a lot, and you know, there was quite a bit of emphasis on money, you know. So it's good if we keep the focus on Krishna, isn't it? It's like
Yeah. I was actually, I saw a quote from Prabhupada saying that, I mean, Prabhupada often said different things to different time, place, and circumstance. but I forget what it said. I was going to send it to Hema, but it was basically saying a devotee should be poor. And I was thinking, I'll send that to my wife. That might save me in future. But Prabhupada was saying it kind of, he was emphasizing that point that, you can become a little bit sort of like flabby, and, whereas if we have things that you have to really depend on Krishna. Yeah, when you don't have much, I mean, I've heard stories of devotees. They were going to get kicked out of the temple because they couldn't pay the rent, and they didn't know what to do. So they just prayed. They said, "Well, we'll just have a big kirtan, and we'll just chant." So they chanted, and they had this big kirtan. They were praying to Krishna, and they walked down the street. And Shyama Sundar, I think, told the story. And literally, as they walked down the street, no lie, like $20, $50, $100 notes just started blowing in their face down the street, and they couldn't understand what was going on. Maybe someone had robbed a bank and they'd thrown the money out, or they couldn't figure it out. But money just appeared everywhere, and they were scrabbling around on the floor, just grabbing all of these notes. And they went and paid the bills off at the temple.
I've got a beautiful picture of Lakshmi Devi on the wall, and sometimes when I'm sitting chanting japa, I sit and look at the picture. And when I do that, every time I go out, somebody gives me, like, I don't want a book, but there's like, a handful of like change, like, a £10 and change or something like that, £15 or something, I think that was because I was meditating on Lakshmi Devi this morning. Wow. So, well, Prabhupada says preaching the money will come. We don't really need to worry about money. Prabhupada says preaching money will come, so I'm waiting on it,
Waiting for payday.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to do Sankirtan in the 90s in Scotland. I don't know if you've heard, but we used to make loads and loads of money, It was like, it was like we were making loads, but the novelty of that went, now I just want money just to use for the preaching, wholly and solely. I mean, when I was younger, it was a bit of a buzz making the money, you know what I mean? It was like, it was great fun, it was like, you felt great and that, but the kind of novelty that's gone now. So when I meet people, it's more like, I want to do something for them, and if they want to give money, great, But I'm quite confident it will come from Krishna will give it, Lakshmi Devi will give it. But, I'm not kind of concentrating on it, I'm not concentrating on it. Yeah. But I read a nice thing in Back to Godhead about Satsvarup talking to Prabhupada. Satsvarup asked Prabhupada, what's the most important thing about Krishna consciousness? And Prabhupada said, to be honest with Krishna. I've always remembered that answer. I read that must have been about 15 years ago, and I always remembered that, that's a very important thing, because, we see a lot of people coming and going, and I'm thinking, it's a bit heartbreaking. It'd be nice to see these people again. And it'd be like, there must be some kind of solution, to sort of keeping people and keeping in contact with them more, I don't know if you've experienced that much, but I have over the years,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do sort of see that there's, I mean, we've only been here in Canterbury for maybe 4 years.
Yeah.
But already, we can think of people that they come and they, it's just difficult for whatever reason. People find it difficult, to stick around. But we always notice that obviously people don't ever forget Krishna. Like, I think I heard one devotee was saying that when someone gets a taste, I think it was Rupa Goswami or someone wrote, when someone gets a taste of Krishna consciousness, for the rest of their lives, they're haunted by bhakti. Because they can't get rid of the taste, they're haunted by it. And so I mean, I was just working today. I was cutting someone's grass in a village about 10 minutes away. And a lady walked past who used to come to programs. She sort of waved and, carried on walking. And I sort of think, she lives in that village, but she does, so I think it's a case of just sort of staying in touch with people sort of always just being open and friendly, and people just being easy around us and realizing that we don't really want anything from anyone.
I want to give people the impression that I want to give, you know.
Yeah.
If we do give the impression people that we want something off people, I think it puts them off. But if we give them the impression that we want to give, then, you know, I think they're more inclined to make friends with us, you know. I mean, I just think, what can I do? What can I do? Every day I'm thinking, what can I do? And I just keep getting back to, well, I can't do anything else but follow to the best of my ability, you know, follow Bhagavad Gita to the best of my ability. I can't think of anything else I can do, you know. Well, I don't know anything outside that, you know. It's like, you know, just kind of follow and let Krishna, like, make arrangements sort of thing, you know. And I feel, well, the stricter I follow, the more Krishna will make arrangements sort of thing, you know. I'm thinking like that now, although I don't want to put people off, like, especially in the beginning, like, you know, I don't want to give people the impression it's all rules and regulations. I want to give them the impression it's about love for Krishna, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what it's really about, you know. And he loves everyone, and, you know, we're trying to sort of emanate that and give that out to everyone. No one's excluded, sort of thing, you know.
The first impression I ever got of Krishna consciousness was that it's just fun.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And it is, you know. I mean, obviously, there's a different mood for different people, isn't there? And so some people are attracted to a very kind of grave or staunch sort of thing, and that's there, if, you know, if you want it. But my first impression was always, we're having a big party, and everyone's invited, and, you know, it's like, it's serious.
Good, yeah, it's a good mood, yeah.
But
people want a party, innit? Everyone wants a party, you know, and, you know, it's like, where it's really happening is like for eternity, you know, a party for eternity, you know what I mean? And
that's it. And there's no come down, there's no hangover, so that's kind of like you know, here we kind of just, when we put on programs and things, it's just, we just try and have a good time. And of course, when you see people that are interested and who actually look like they want to take it seriously, then obviously we try and serve everybody on an individual basis, you know, and so we try and help those people. But especially with students at the university, they just want to let their hair down and have a good time in a safe place. You know.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm thinking more these days it's like to be a bit deeper, you know, have deeper relationships with people, you know, not so, you know, yeah, I'm thinking, because quite a few people have said to me lately, we should be having deeper relationships, you know, and I'm thinking, yeah, they have got a point there, you know. We have to, like, because you're reading things like Caitanya Charitamrita, and it's so deep and meaningful, and it's so touching, you know. It's like, it really touches your heart, like, you know, Vasudev Dat and the other associates, you know. That's like, because I think that's what really appeals to people, if we touch their hearts, you know. I mean, the Hare Krishna movement hasn't got members like Christianity or maybe even Buddhism, but I think we are good at touching people's hearts, you know. But it's kind of like, there is a kind of mood as well that everybody's a wee bit afraid to get to know each other, you know, like a bit deeper, you know what I mean, in case, like, it's like, oh no, you know, something, you know, that a sort of unkind of, you know, a fear it's not actually there, you know what I mean? There's a fear, we've got a fear of something that doesn't actually exist, sort of thing, you know, because, I mean, as souls, we can't really be hurt, can we, you know, if we just want to give Krishna, you know?
Yeah. And we've all been burnt out so many times in relationships and stuff, you know, it's hard. It can be difficult actually to
of
trust
course.
each other, I suppose. Yeah,
well, we knew people, of course, we don't, like, you know, get really deep, but, you know, I mean, we are chanting Hare Krishna and following principles and giving as devotees, you know, and it's like, I mean, we can take a bit of a chance with each other, I feel, you know.
We haven't got much else going on in this world, so we might as well. We might as well.
Yeah, there's not a lot happening, is there? Especially now. It's like we've seen what it's all about. Really, it's all falling apart, isn't it? It's like, and people still haven't quite clicked on. You know, it's like, well, we better do something. You know, I think they're going to probably have to suffer a bit more. Someone said that. It's like, well, people are suffering now, but they're not suffering quite enough to kind of click on. You know, that. You know, I better do something deep. I better do something spiritual because the material world's falling apart, you know. But I suppose it's up to us to kind of just try and give as many people as we possibly can, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like Prabhupada said, Lord Chaitanya's already he's already said this will spread everywhere. So it's all done and dusted. It's just whether or not we want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So
Sure,
we just have to apply ourselves in some way. And I always think, reading that from what Prabhupada wrote, what he was saying there, I mean, Prabhupada could sort of do everything. So it's hard to try and imitate. We shouldn't really try and imitate him. We just have to try and follow in his footsteps, isn't it? But he had that knack of, like you said, being very sort of personal and having these very deep relationships, and at the same time being able to think really big.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
There's sometimes, I think I've had that problem before of like trying to do a lot and you end up kind of watering it down a bit because I'm just not able to spread myself that far, you know, and really give my heart to it yet. I mean, I'm sure that will come one day.
But in the beginning days in New York, like you say, Prabhupada, when I'm reading the Lilamrta about like Prabhupada in New York, it did seem very warm and intimate and deep. And, you know, I said to Pallika this morning, I says, those 6 devotees that came to the UK, I mean, we should just be like that, you know. They didn't really get caught up in inner conflicts and, you know, all kinds of, you know, they just got on with giving people Krishna. And I thought, well, you know, I think, well, I want to be a bit more like that, you know, like Mukunda Swami, you know, he was always like a great hero of mine, you know. It's like, you know, there was warmth, intimacy, friendship. And I mean, look what they did. I mean, they went from America, they came to London to meet the Beatles, and they did it. They did it. I mean, would Krishna consciousness be what it is now if they hadn't met George Harrison, you know? I mean, who knows? It's like what it would be, you know?
Yeah. That's like a defining point in the history of the planet, I think, is when they met the Beatles. Because that changed everything, you know? Yeah. I think one of the things they seem to have is like a simplicity about them. There's a sort of lack of duplicity there. Simple-hearted people who you could trust, who are not going to try and sort of do a number on you. They're not, you know, they actually, and I know when Prabhupada, he sent Shyama Sundar to go and ask George Harrison for a donation to publish Krishna book. And there's that famous story when he went to George's house. And Shyama Sundar was thinking, I mean, the famous part of the story is when he asks George for the donation and the mood just changes completely because they're just friends and suddenly he's asking him for money. The mood completely changes and Shyama Sundar thinks, oh, I've blown a really good friendship here. And then all of a sudden, all the lights go out in the house and there's a massive thunderstorm. Have you heard that? There's a massive thunderstorm or a big peal of thunder goes through the sky and a big power cut. All the lights in the house go out and they're set around the dinner table. And then after, like, you know, a few seconds or whatever, all the lights come back on. And George just goes, well, I better get my checkbook out. And he'll say, well, you know, obviously Krishna's spoken. But the interesting thing, based on what Bhaktivinode Prabhu was just saying, is that actually Shyama Sundar's way more concerned about blowing a friendship with George Harrison. Obviously, Prabhupada's asked for the money, and Prabhupada knows what he's doing. But in Shyama Sundar's mind, it's his relationship with George isn't about that. It's actually just about, like, he's my friend, and I want to help him advance in spiritual life. And so he had that sense of trepidation about asking for money because he thought it might sour the thing, which is actually a really sweet mood, isn't it? You know, not to sort of to think like that.
Yeah, I do like to take some chances, though, you know. I do like to take, well, you know, I feel, you know, if I'm not going to take chances, I'm not really going to get anywhere. I mean, I won't risk my spiritual life, but, you know, I do want, you know, take a chance, see what works out, you know, and, you know, go out my way a wee bit sort of thing, you know, and try a few different things and, you know, see what works, see, you know. Because it's quite surprising sometimes how people, you know, you think, oh, I can't tell them too much about Krishna, they won't understand. But sometimes, you know, I took my cousin to the temple once and it was her first time at the temple and she doesn't really know anything about Krishna consciousness. And I showed her Vrinda Devi and Vrinda Devi had a parrot in her hand, you know, the deity Vrinda Devi. And she says, what's that in her hand? I says, that's a parrot. And then I kind of stopped and thought, well, I tell her, you know, what the parrot does in the spiritual world, you know. And I says, yeah, that's it. I thought, well, and first time at the temple, you know, and so I says to her, oh, the parrots, they go around the spiritual world and they see what's going on and they go back to Vrinda Devi and they all give messages so she can make arrangements for Krishna's enjoyment. And I just looked at her to see what her reaction would be. Is she going to just walk away and, you know, that's not her, you know? But she just went like that to me. She says, oh, lucky Krishna. So, you know what I mean? It was like she understood. She completely understood, you know? Because Janananda Maharaj says when we meet people, we should kind of try and initiate them a bit into Krishna consciousness, you know? And, you know, as devotees, we don't need to be initiating spiritual masters, but we can initiate people in a certain way, you know what I mean? Into their introduction where they won't forget, you know what I mean? Because she won't forget that now, you know? Janananda made that point and I thought, yeah, it's good, you know?
Yeah.
I was talking to a woman the other day and I got into something and I could see she just she just was not like comprehending at all, you know, and I just kind of went on to another subject, you know. But I mean, I think it's kind of, you know, good to tell people about Krishna, you know, since the Hare Krishna movement was all about Krishna.
Yeah. It's a very simple thing and it's not actually very difficult to do, you know. You chant about Krishna, you dance, you tell people about Krishna, you give them some prasadam. Like,
you know,
the whole thing.
Prabhupada said to Tribhuvanas, he said, you have to be careful. Krishna consciousness is so simple, you might miss it. You might, you know, people are looking for a big PhD or, you know, a big Swami or, you know, somebody that's like really flamboyant and all that. They might miss it a bit, you know. It's like, it's about love, you know, it's about love in people's hearts, you know, no matter what kind of material condition they're in, you know. So we have to be careful that way, that we don't be too external, you know, and go by externals too much, because nobody knows anybody else's relationship with Krishna. Nobody else knows it. No one. It's like that's between the devotee and Krishna, you know. So I've been thinking about that aspect and kind of meditating on that a bit, and it's like, wow, it's nice, it's interesting, you know. It's because simple things that make me very happy right now, to be honest. Very simple things. I bought new frames for my Krishna pictures, and I was so happy. It just made me happy. It was just like a couple of frames, £10 each, and it was like, I'm so happy to do that for Krishna. It was like, it just made me happy, you know. It was like, wow, that was great buying those. I enjoyed buying those. It's like, wow, I feel I'm presenting Krishna nicely, putting these pictures in a nice frame. When people come in the house, they'll see that, you know, the pictures are well looked after and, you know, they'll get a good impression of Krishna. You know, I just felt like that, and it was so nice, you know, just simple little frames, you know. It was just like, you know, wonderful just to do that service in the day, you know. I was saying to Pallika, wow, I'm so happy just to do that for Krishna. It just made me so happy, you know. So I'm thinking about that way these days. Yeah, it's simple, you know. It's not like I have to go out and distribute 1 million books, you know, and you know, preach to, you know, countries of people. But you know, I'd like to do that, you know. I mean, I'd like to do something for the world, but I suppose, I mean, Prabhupada does say that Krishna consciousness is spread by the love that goes out from the kirtan in the temple. So whatever we do, the love goes out from that to the world, and it will help people somewhere, won't it? So
Yeah.
It's good to associate with devotees and do this kind of reading and things like that, you know, because I become more enthused, you know, if other devotees are taking part than if I'm sitting reading myself. I'm reading back to Vikashi's book about Bhakti Siddhanta. Oh, what a masterpiece! Well, I'm praying to Bhakti Siddhanta to become like one of his disciples, you know. I mean, but the amazing thing about Prabhupada was even these people didn't understand what Prabhupada was doing. Huh? I mean, they couldn't understand. They're like, what is he doing? He can't, you know, with women, and these guys are all just taking drugs and hippies, and he's like initiating them and marrying them, and they couldn't understand what he was doing, you know, even the saints in India. It's like we're so fortunate, aren't we, to be even in contact, even reading about his pastimes, you know.
Oh yeah.
I'll tell you one last thing, right? About I was out in book distributing Lilamrta, ever well-wishers, right? Ever well-wishers. I had 2 in my bag. One woman bought one off me for a £5, right? So I started praying to Prabhupada. I was saying to Prabhupada, it's so nice to be distributing books about your preaching pastimes, Srila Prabhupada. Please help me distribute this one I've got in my bag. As soon as I stopped praying, right, this guy stopped. And so I gave him an Isopanasad. He says, I'm interested. He says, I'm out looking for a present for my girlfriend right now. So I pulled out the other ever well-wisher and gave him it, and I explained it to him a bit. And he just put his hand in his pocket and gave me £10. He says, is that okay? I says, fine, thanks. So it was like my prayer was answered, you know.
Yeah.
Immediately like that, you know. It was like, I felt it was a kind of heartfelt prayer, you know. I was enjoying like, you know, this, you know, I was enjoying letting people know about Prabhupada's pastimes, you know. And I feel Prabhupada reciprocated with that. Like, this guy stopped just immediately, you know, and he just took a book like that, £10 for the book. No, you know, no, practically he didn't ask me. Well, he didn't ask me a question. It was just like so nice, you know. So yeah, that was in Glasgow. It was nice to distribute those couple of books. I were well-wishers about Prabhupada's pastimes, huh?
Yeah, we got donated about 2 pallets of those books about 2 years ago, and we distributed them to the university students on campus. And we must have done about 2,000 of them in a couple of days during Freshers Week. And well, students were coming up to us and saying, the guy who's now the president of our student society, he found one on the floor in the corridor outside at a house party that he'd gone to. I just started reading it, and the house party was boring, and he was just like hanging out, you know, waiting to go home or something. And he picked up this book and just started, you know, reading it, and he's now the president of the society. And all the students that I've met, loads of them say to us, "Oh, I've seen it. I've gone on a house viewing, or my girlfriend's house has one of these in it, or I went to view a flat to rent the other day, and it's on the shelf," because so many of these books went out. But it's amazing how I think it's often easily overlooked, the power of Prabhupada's pastimes, that they're really instructive and deeply transcendental. That it reads like a movie or like a story, but once you start getting really into it, you're coming into contact with something really far out, you know, when you're dealing with Prabhupada. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone else had any other reflections or anything they wanted to share, or or any comments or anything else?
If I can, just kind of quickly agree with Bhakti Prabhu about the early disciples of Srila Prabhupada. It's really inspiring to know that you can be yourself and be sincere and still make progress in Krishna consciousness, and not kind of beat yourself up all the time that you're not doing A, B, and C, or you could be doing it better, or you just kind of talk to people and give them what you're getting from Krishna consciousness, and that's the main thing.
Yeah. It's a really inspiring story there. They had a little kid. I mean, they turned up with like 3 married couples with no money and a baby. I mean, it was like almost, like materially, it was like a hopeless case. It was like, how are they going to do anything? Yeah, it's it's really inspiring to us, isn't it? When you think like that, yeah. I think in one class, Prabhupada said, the whole Krishna consciousness movement is going on by Lord Chaitanya's mercy. And he said, in front, all his disciples were there. And Prabhupada said, how can we prove that this is happening by Lord Chaitanya's mercy? What's the proof? And he pointed at all his disciples and he said, everybody here is a material failure. And yet they've built this worldwide society, temples and farms and restaurants and books being published, and like that. And he said they're all failures, and yet we are doing so much across the world. And all the devotees went, Haribo! They're in ecstasy because Prabhupada called them failures, And I always think of that because I'm like I'm really a hopeless case in so many ways. But by Lord Chaitanya's mercy, somehow you're able to do something just by trying. He loves a tryer, doesn't he? So you just sort of like give it a bash. You just do something to try and help people, and then watch the magic happen. Really, it's like, yeah, exciting. Yeah. And Mother Lucy has thanked everyone. I don't know if everyone can see the chat box, but she's just written there, thanks for the reflections, and it's lovely to meet more devotees. The reading's getting exciting now. Yeah, it's really hotting up, isn't it? Crikey, it's properly hotting up. Yeah, it gets really far out. Yeah, so I think, unless anyone had any last points, it's probably time to wrap up for now. Yeah, I think so. Is that all right, everybody? Thank Bhaktivinode Prabhu and Pallika especially. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah. It's great. It's so nice to hear your reflections and to hear you both read.
Yeah. I could talk all night. Yeah, I could talk all night.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it again next week. Why not? Yeah. If you're free, let's do it again. And it's really nice to hear everyone reading and reading out loud. It's so sweet and relishable. It's great. So I'll put these up now. I've got Maharaj's reading, the one we did with Maharaj like 2 weeks ago. I'll put that up, and I'll put this up. Yeah. And back next week. I'm feeling fired up now. I've heard about Bhaktivinode Prabhu's Sankirtan pastimes, and Prabhupada's getting out there and doing stuff. So I'm starting to feel a bit like, I want to go out and do something crazy for Krishna now. That's what I feel like doing. Yeah.
We'll report back next week.
Yeah, we'll see what happens this time next week. Maybe nothing's happened. I don't know, but we'll see. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and taking part. So blessed, genuinely. And we're doing the Facebook thing tomorrow night at 6:30 if anyone's free and they want to join in. But otherwise, we'll see you next week for more of this, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Bhaktivinode ki jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Yagya ki jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Bol.